Good evening and welcome. Live from the United Methodist Church in Crescent City, it's the District 3 Supervisorial Candidate Forum, presented by Redwood Voice Youth Media and KFUG Community Radio, in partnership with the Wild Rivers Outpost and the Del Norte Triplicate. Here are tonight's moderators, Pastor Dana Gilport of the United Methodist Church and Grant Merriweather from Redwood Voice Youth Media.
Hello, welcome to our first candidate forum. Tonight we're featuring candidates for Supervisor for District 3. I'm Grant Merriweather from Redwood Voice Youth Media, and I'm joined by co-moderator Pastor Dana Gilport.
Thank you, Grant, and yes, welcome everyone. I am Pastor Dana Gilport, pastor of this beautiful church hosting the venue tonight. We'll be hearing from each of the three candidates from District 3 sitting with us right here in front of me. So when you guys are doing your opening statements, please introduce yourselves to everyone out there. And just a quick reminder to ensure our COVID safety protocols, masks are required while indoors at all times, over the nose and mouth, with the exception of those who are speaking, and then they put the mask back on when we are done. As you are answering, keep in mind that you are in a house of worship, so please watch your language.
Tonight our questions will be asked by a panel of media representatives composed of Mike Thornton from KFUG Community News, Jessica St. Andrews from Wild Rivers Outpost, Monique Camarena from Redwood Voice, and Dan Schmidt from the Triplicate.
And each question posed will allow for a 2-minute response from each candidate, uninterrupted. After everyone is finished, there will be a final 2 minutes for the panelists to ask any follow-up or clarifying questions, should the panelists have any. And please keep an eye on your 2 minutes. You should see the time clock up on the screens, the monitors to your left and to your right. But if for whatever reason you don't keep an eye on your time, I will gently and then continually more forcefully, if you don't listen to me, remind you.
We'll begin tonight with the 2-minute opening statements from each candidate. We'll begin with Joe Akin.
Good evening. My name is Joe Akin, and I'm running for the 3rd District Supervisor. With vacancies in the upcoming election, time has never been better to stand up and affect the future and economic compass of this county. I'm not running to make decisions for me, I'm running to make decisions for the people of this county. I'm dedicated to facilitating the needs of all residents through bringing stakeholders together and making all the right decisions. The issues facing this county are numerous, convoluted, and critical. So they're going to require bold and decisive action to respond to those. As a veteran, I have 32 years in this county. Approximately 28 years in state service and middle and upper management and investigative services. I have untold hours of community service in this community. I've got 5 years with the Sheriff's Department as a reserve. I've got 10 years with search and rescue and an underwater investigator. Got over 8 years with the Emergency Operations Center here in mitigating disasters and recovering from disasters. My visions include transparency rather than the current smoke and mirror government that we have in place. I'm dedicated to the use of common sense and cost savings with appropriate and transparent governance. Together we can move this pass-through community into a destination community, and I look forward to serving this county. Thank you.
Thank you for your opening statement. The next candidate for their opening statement is Chris Howard.
Thank you. My name is Chris Howard. I'm currently District 3 Supervisor, which covers Smith River, Hyuchi, Gasky, and areas in between. I've been very active in this community for many years. My political career really didn't start with the Board of Supervisors. It actually started long before then, when members of the community really wanted us to tackle issues around Castle Rock Charter School and what was occurring out there. My wife has been a school teacher in our district for a very long time, and we have 2 children here that drove a lot of the issues around the reaction that we took with my family becoming very involved in this community. The interests are large for me, and they're driven by my children and the faith that I have that they'll come back and enjoy this beautiful area that we have come to call home. We've lived here for close to 27 years now, and we found that this community, like no other, is a place of plenty. It's a place where we can succeed because we're small and we can communicate well together. In doing so, we've taken active steps over the last couple decades in growing from what was basically a resource economy collapse of our commercial fishing and timber industries that has created a void, a generational void that affected lives of many families in our area. It took a while for us to recover from it, but we're building those blocks to get there. Unfortunately, there are things in place that prevent us from moving at a quicker pace. Most of that is because of certain state mandates that we currently fight every day. We like local control. That formula seems to work well for us, and more importantly, allows us to focus on those areas most critical. Economic development is an area of focus and that I'm strongly interested in and have been working on, for the most part, successfully for 2 decades. Tourism is one of those areas that we focused on as a quick fix, but it is not the only fix for economic development in our community. In order to have really strong living wage jobs, that has got to go farther than economic development around tourism and really reach a broad sector of our community outside of government and in the private sector. So as we look forward to the future of Del Norte County and the areas that I have focused in on over the years, we look forward to a bright future not only for us that are currently here, but also the future generations in Del Norte County. Appreciate your time this evening for attending.
Thank you for your opening statement. The next candidate for their opening statement is Frank Magarino.
Good evening. My name is Frank Magarino, and I am running for District 3 Supervisor, and I'm asking for your vote. I have a great deal of experience and knowledge in the private sector as well as in the government institutional setting. In 1999, my wife and I started a courier company from its inception and built it up to a multi-million-dollar company. In 2006, we decided to move to Del Norte County, being that my wife was born and raised here, because we wanted to be closer to family and raise our children in a small-town setting. Along the way, we committed ourselves to the community in many facets and volunteering in many capacities, such as School Board PTSO, Community Assistance League, among other community charitable events. In 2012, I served as a grand juror and gained a lot of insight to the workings of our local government while investigating public concerns. From 2014 to 2016, I served as Planning Commissioner, which gave me the further understanding on how our county departments work. In 2016, I was elected to the Del Norte Unified School District and re-elected in 2020. As you can imagine, being a school board member in a time of COVID was no picnic. It's been quite challenging, as a matter of fact. Many difficult decisions and discussions were made that affected every student, parent, teacher, staff, as well as the community, with lots of intense and high-stake conversations which the board grappled with on a regular basis. I'm no stranger to pressure in making tough decisions with the community's best interests at heart. I just recently sold my business, and I am retired from the private sector. With that said, I want to bring my years of experience as a business owner, entrepreneur, and a public servant to make our counties as your District 3 Supervisor. And I assure you that I will make it my full-time job and give you my undivided attention, because in these times, we cannot afford anything less. Thank you.
Thank you for your opening statement.
Our first panelist tonight will be Dan Schmidt from the Del Norte Triplicate. Please remember that each question posed by the panelist will allow for a 2-minute response from each candidate, uninterrupted. After everyone has finished, there will be a final 2 minutes for the panelist to ask any follow-up or clarifying questions. So Dan, if you would please direct your first question.
Thank you very much. I would like each of you to think about specific goals and objectives. I'd like to first present this question to Supervisor Howard, Sir, what do you expect to accomplish in the next 4 years that you did not accomplish during the last 4? Specific goals and objectives.
I'd love to be able to say, in reality, that last chance grade would be fixed in the next 4 years. Reality isn't going to happen. I'm just going to set that clearly as a mark right now. Last chance grade has been named as the #1 priority for Caltrans in the state to fund. It's a very important project to our community, and it's a very important project to the governor and the state legislature. The money's there. The biological opinion, the geotech that allows it to happen is not. I want that to be a #1 priority, but realistically, it is not. Right now, as many of you are aware, this county really needs to actively address mental illness and issues surrounding our public service to them with housing and how they're treated in a jail environment. We are in crisis in the state of California, and it's a massive crisis. It's just not Del Norte County. And as this spreads forward, how these individuals are treated is critically important to our community. So tackling this crisis head on is not something we could look away from. With the current proposals by the governor of the state of California and current bills that we're seeing coming through the state legislature, Del Norte County will not be left alone. We will face sanctions that currently proposed in the legislation of $1,000 a day if we turn a blind eye to this. So sweeping it under the carpet, as it has been in this state for decades and decades, is no longer a solution, but that needs to be top and foremost of our minds as elected officials in this county. And I would hope seriously that anybody coming into this seat would feel the same way. That is #1 goal, in my opinion, right now to address. Public safety, the funding of it is critical. They go hand in hand. How we move forward with public safety is going to be interesting. As you're aware, in November, Measure R will be back on the ballot. Now, I know the community has shared various perspectives on this over the years, but what I do know, after having studied our budget for the last 8 years, is that there has never been a more opportune time to show law enforcement, in particular, that they are loved and welcomed in our community. We have been short-staffed beyond belief, not only at our jail, which has resulted in some of the issues that you're seeing today, but in addition, our beat cops. Our beat cops that are overworked, understaffed, and cannot get to the margins of our community, in particular District 3.
Thank you, Supervisor Howard.
Mr. Magarino, sir, what would you expect to accomplish in the next 4 years that was not accomplished in the last 4? And we're talking about your specific goals and objectives.
Well, obviously, everybody speaks of last chance, which is a very high priority for this county. But last chance right now, it's in the hands of the feds. And really, all we can do is just get our lobbyists out there, keep lobbying to them, not drop the ball. And I know we have a lobbyist up there. His name is Greg Burns, and he's been there for 10 years, I believe. So he's been there for a long time, and he's got pretty good connections. We need to also be able to go to Washington, D.C. and present ourselves out there. And you know, we have tight budgets, so instead of spending our money going to Japan or going to other locations, we should spend it on going to Washington, D.C. and move forward with the lobbying on that. So, but last chance that's in the Fed's hands right now. That's going to be generational. But my immediate concern is the issues that we have in this county are the drug endemic and the homelessness that we have. I mean, you walk around the streets and you see it. It's not avoidable. And I think that what we need to do is, of course, build some shelters for them, some homes, and probably use the AUD, or ADU, I'm sorry, the adjacent dwelling unit. And, but not in the sense where we, you know, would buy a hotel and put it in the middle of town, where if we're striving to be a tourist destination, well, I've heard some folks and friends that come to town says, what's going on out there? You know, why do you have this in the middle of your town? So I don't think that was a wise decision. I wouldn't have voted for that. I would have voted to, move it to a place where they would still have access to the resources that they need, but not where it would disrupt the attraction of this county. And I think that there are certain ways how we can deal with that. In my opinion, there's probably about 4 different angles that we can take, 4 different prongs.
Thank you, Mr. Magarino.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. And Mr. Akin, talking about your specific goals and objectives, what do you expect to accomplish in the next 4 years that was not accomplished in the last 4?
One of the biggest things that I said was transparency. We want to find out about these taxes. It's not about having them or not having them. It's about finding out where they're being spent. And if they're being spent for the reasons that they were sold to us when we voted on them. As far as the sheriff's office goes, I don't think that's a money issue, and I don't think you're going to fix it by throwing money at it. The homeless is a big issue, and there's a lot of things coming down the road for that. We all have compassion for people. We all believe in the sanctity of life. What we have to do is we make sure that we can meet their needs, meet their treatments and such, but at what expense? We can't destroy this county trying to meet their needs if we don't have the ability to do that. You can't keep taxing people. It's not sustainable. We need to bring revenue into this county. And like I said, I want to turn it into a destination place and not a pass-through. I sit up in Hiuchi all the time at the cafe, and we watch people just go right through and keep going. We need to have a reason for them to stay here. It boggles my mind that last chance grade and such, it's been all the studies done on that, a lot of money pushed around and not getting things done. And I'm not talking about Caltrans, and I'm not talking about the people who are out there trying to get it done. I'm talking about our legislature and our government, because if they can bring a whole bunch of houses in the future and waive all the CEQA and NEPA rights and everything else and the Coastal Commission stuff, why can't they do it for that? Why wasn't this done before? So I would be asking those tough questions.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Dan, do you have any follow-up or clarifying questions for any of the?
Very, very, very brief. Yuval mentioned the last chance grade. What route that is being presented by Caltrans, I think there's 3 different routes, do you support?
Who are you
Let's go
asking?
with you.
Currently, I would support, it's not the one that's selected, but I would support the ridge route, the one that traverses the ridge. It's the quickest way to get from point A to point B. It doesn't put us in a tunnel, which is the one that's currently been selected by the group tasked with this task. But the ridge route is the cheapest at this point in time.
I would support the tunnel, because what that would do is, first of all, it would disrupt our old growth trees the least, and it will also be I know there's a lot of sacred ground up there for our, tribal nation, and I think that would show respect for them, and I think that in the long run, I think that would probably be the best option.
Thank you.
I know it's the most expensive, but I think it's going to be for a long time.
Mr. Akin, sir?
I'm not going to pretend to know a whole lot about that. Like I said, I haven't been in politics. I don't know all the details. I believe that a lot of the decisions have already been made, that the tunnel's off the table, and I think one of the other routes is off the table. So I also believe that it's above this county's ability to do anything about it right now. I mean, if the government's taking it over, then I don't think they're going to let us say what we want. But I would go with, what's going to be least expensive for the county, and I think that the go-around is probably it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Any further clarifying questions?
No, thank you.
Wonderful.
So the next panelist is Monique Camarena from Redwood Voice.
Hello. Thank you. This is for all 3 candidates. Since there's easy availability to tobacco products in Del Norte County, youth vaping is a major issue in our school district and impacts the health of our youth. A tobacco retail license is a tool that intends to reduce youth initiation into tobacco and nicotine use. A model TRL has been proposed to the City Council and Board of Supervisors by local youth. Some ordinance provisions include the regulation of tobacco and nicotine product sales, restriction of flavored tobacco products, and the restriction of nicotine products, displays, and ads in youth-friendly areas. Do you support our tobacco retail license that includes these provisions? Could we start with Mr. Akin?
Sorry, I had trouble hearing a lot of that, but.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You know, it's been an age-old problem forever, deciding what people have the right to choose and what the government has the right to tell them to do. I personally am not a tobacco user, so that's not an issue with me, but I do believe that there is a bit of a crisis there with our young people and their ability to get a hold of it. Beyond that, I don't have a lot of knowledge in that subject.
Thank you. Mr. Howard, same question. Do you support a tobacco retail license that includes the regulation and restriction of tobacco products?
Yeah, let me get to the point of your question, which is, does the government affect youth vaping through curtailing via zoning the restriction and sale of a product? I don't know how effective it will be. As you're well aware, youth have incredible access to cigarettes, marijuana-type products these days, and vaping is one of those next-generation pieces, especially through the addictive nature of it, that they've latched onto very, very much so. We've heard direct comments as through joint meetings of the city and council and the county board of supervisors that this wants to and needs to be done. The most interesting piece of this is it's got an opportunity to go before our voters. And in this case, I would like to see our voters decide on how best the city and the county should react to this issue.
Thank you. And Mr. Magarino, same question. Do you support a tobacco retail license that about the regulation and restriction of tobacco products, flavored?
I do. I think that, you know, I believe in free choice and whatever you want to do, and as long as it's not hurting anybody, and as long as it's not putting a burden on the society. And sometimes when, like if you start young, you know, there's certain diseases you're going to get as a result of that, and that becomes a burden on society as far as hospitalization, care, and all that stuff. So in general, even though you have a right to do that, and I agree, you have a right to do whatever you want as a conservative constitutionalist, you're entitled to that. But at the same time, you got to watch out that it's not going to put a heavy burden on society. I don't, you know, as far as restricting it, I think it should be made a lot more difficult to get a hold of. You know, I think maybe through taxation, maybe a little more tax. I don't care for that idea either. But perhaps just figuring out a way to make it more difficult for the kids to have access to it. Because as a school board member, that is some of the things that our school board student representative has said that, look, we've seen kids in the restrooms do that. We've seen this happen, and especially if it's, you know, marijuana or anything like that, well, that's going to hamper your learning ability. It's going to hamper, you know, it's going to create disruption. It should be kept out of the kids' hands at pretty much at any cost we can do, short of taking your liberties away.
Thank you.
Do you have any follow-up or clarifying questions?
I do not right now.
Our next panelist is Jessica Saynar Andrews from Wild Rivers Outpost. And again, you will each have 2 minutes to respond to her question.
Hi, everybody. In 2020, Del Norte County voters approved Measure R, which levied a 1% sales tax in the county. It was initially projected to generate $1.2 million in revenue annually and is now expected to generate $1.8 million through the end of the fiscal year. Did you support Measure R in 2020? Why yes or why no?
The first candidate to answer can be Mr. Akin.
Sorry.
So, to be honest, I was out of town during all that. I was gone for over a year, and so I wasn't here for that. At this point, the issues I really have with that is not that it's in place or not in place. It's where it's being spent, and if it was spent on what we said, what they sold it as being spent on. You know, everybody wants better law enforcement, everybody wants all that, but you know, that money's been in place for 2 years. And yet, all I see is the sheriff's response to things going down. So the money's already out there. The one thing that really bothered me about the whole thing with the board recently was that it says specifically in the tax that it's to stay there until the people didn't want it. The people got together, they did a recall measure, and that's the way our system works. So I think that since they brought it to the table, that it should have been accepted instead of kicked down the road. Because that's what the people said they wanted, and that's what the measure said it would do, and then it didn't happen. That's my biggest issue with it there. You know, taxes are a necessary evil. We're gonna have taxes. We have to. Again, it's just about transparency and where it's going. So at this point, I would probably support the recall.
Thank you. Supervisor Howard?
Mr. Howard, yes.
No, thank you, and I appreciate you asking that. I think Mr. Akin brings up some good points here. I'd just like to say some of those points aren't factual. So this tax hasn't been in place very long at all. The county has just started collecting it, matter of fact. Just put the positions in place with a committee that provides essentially the transparency that the community sought and was written into the resolution that formed this action. And so the budget, as Jessica alluded to, is projected to come in probably close to 1.7, 1.8 of direly needed funds as voted for. Direly needed funds for our public safety personnel, direly needed funds for our animal control, roads. And with those actions, we set aside this pot of money separate from our general fund budget. So it can be tracked to a point that everybody knows how that money is being spent. Currently, to date, we've really only put that money towards raising the level and the ceiling of the wages for our public safety officers, hiring somebody else for what has been a major community issue, which is specifically blight, through code enforcement and addressing that issue, so another personnel member there, and through the addition of a position in OES. And I think everybody would agree here, all those positions were lacking in capacity in Del Norte County. And more importantly, we needed to raise that bar, so at least in public safety, we did not have this revolving door. This is the first time we had a measure, tax measure specifically, that addressed public safety and more specifically law enforcement in our community, something that our constituents in District 3 have been screaming about since I took office. We voted to have it on the ballot. Our constituents took a vote and they passed it. That money is now in a transparent budget outside our general fund, and it has an oversight committee to ensure that what the constituents voted for goes into effect. And that's another 5-member board that does a very effective job at really making sure the board's held accountable with how those monies are budgeted.
Thank you, Supervisor Howard. Mr. Magarino?
Yes, I did vote for Measure R, and I support it 100%. There's a lot of criminal activity going on in our county, and there's been a lot of property theft, break-ins, and that's because of lack of enforcement. It's because we don't have the manpower to enforce this. And by having those revenues from Measure R, we'll be able to hire deputies and be able to patrol areas like Gasky, which rarely get patrolled, an area like Smith River. In fact, one of the things that, talking to my constituents out there, or the folks out there, they want a resident deputy. They would like to have somebody that lives there and could be on call. All we need is 2 of them. And they could be there in a minute instead of, 20 minutes from town. And they would be able to patrol in their own neighborhood and build a relationship with the folks, not just hope that, somebody's going to show up in the next 20 minutes. They'll be there instantly. And that is one of my goals, is to get resident deputies out there to Smith River and Gasky. Let's see, as far as recruiting, I think we should start training from within. Start getting folks from the community and bring them up, and local folks that are interested in becoming deputies, send them to a training. Let's get them going here. They'll stay here because they want to live here. And those funds could be used for that. As far as the, the other sectors of what we're going to use it for, like animal control. Well, in 2012, when I was a grand juror, I investigated animal control, and it was a mess then, and it's still a mess now. Nothing's changed in the last 10 years when I did an investigation through the grand jury. And that is something that really needs to be taken care of right away. I think we need to remodel that place, get some folks in there and that volunteers, and also the blight. That's a very big issue. I mean, we've got land. It's just that a lot of it is sitting on blight land. Blight property of owners that don't even live here, that the city and the county should really get on top of them and say, look, you take care of that or we will, and then bill them for it. And if they can't, we'll take the property and do what I was talking about, the housing for the homeless.
Thank you, Mr. Magarino. Jessica, do you have any follow-up or clarifying questions?
I do, actually.
You have 2 minutes.
Wait, I have 2 minutes?
You and they all have 2 minutes.
Okay. This has also been brought up, but, what are your thoughts on the repeal, and how do you think that will affect the community?
We'll go with Mr. Akin first.
I'm going to double back on part of what was said, but as far as the repeal goes, I'd already kind of spoke to that, was the fact that, like Mr. Howard says, that's the way it works. And, put the repeal out there. If it fails, the tax still in place. It's still part of the process, just like it was when they voted it in. And there's no guarantee it's going to lose just because somebody put up a repeal. But that is the right to do so. How it's going to affect the community, like I said, I don't think throwing money at all these positions. I know that some of these positions, like the dog or animal health there, I know that was short. It's been short for years. Deputies don't leave here because they don't have money. A lot of the deputies leave here because they have families elsewhere. How are we going to change that? They came here because other cities don't let them go to the academy. They say, you come here with the academy, we'll give you a job. So they come to lower income places to get the academy and get the experience, and then they're gone. That's where your biggest problem is, not in the money. I walked all over Gasky a couple weeks ago, and I saw take-home cars there. So there are deputies in those areas. They can respond. They're 24-hour peace officers. Yet when you call the dispatch, they argue with you about whether or not they're going to come out. Then they tell you that, and it's not the dispatcher's job. And when the cops come by, they just say, well, there's nothing we can do about it. And yet you want to raise? Because there is something you can do about it. It's up to the DA to decide what gets done or doesn't get done when a crime's reported, or somebody has the idea that a crime's been reported. Not just the pat answer, there's nothing we can do. So there's a lot more to it than just the money. And there again, we can't compete with other cities on their salaries because we also don't compete with other cities on their revenue.
Thank you, Mr. Akin. You used up all 2 minutes, so you guys will have to hold the rest of your answers to that follow-up question. Apologies.
You had 2 minutes.
Mine would be 10 minutes, 10 seconds.
Quick 10-second response. Go for it.
I agree. I disagree with the repeal, but I think what should have been done, that they should have set a sunset on the measure. They should have given it 4 years and then have the voters another opportunity to vote on it again.
Supervisor Howard, do you have anything?
Yeah, it's going to be completely debilitating, demoralizing for our public safety personnel, for anybody in OES, anybody in animal control. They already feel lack of capacity. This is going to send them walking. I guarantee it, but we could address some of the finer points that Mr. Akin brought up earlier when we have more time.
Thank you.
The next panelist is Mike Thornton from KFUG Community News.
Thank you. First off, thank all three of you for being willing to step up and serve in public office, and thank you for being here this evening.
Thank you.
This question is for all of you. From the accounts published in the Sacramento Bee to the sudden resignation of Sheriff Apperson, charges of felony voter fraud against Sheriff Waltz, Lieutenant Schneck testifying that the Del Norte Sheriff's Office is on the verge of not being able to provide 24/7 law enforcement services, to recent pictures that show horrendous conditions in the jail. It seems safe to say that the Del Norte Sheriff's Office is in a state of crisis. My understanding is that some 70% of Del Norte County's discretionary budget is already allocated to law enforcement purposes. So what can you, as a county supervisor, do to remedy this situation and ensure that the residents of Del Norte County have a sheriff's office they can trust and depend upon? And we could start with Mr. Akin, since that seems to be the way we're doing this. Thank you.
2 minutes.
Yeah. Is that 2 minutes for all of us, or? So, yeah, again, I just recently saw the photos of the jail, and that is appalling. And there are laws that have been on the books for years about how you can house inmates and the condition of their cells. So again, it comes back to, can we not do the job, or are we not doing the job? Leadership's going to be a big thing. And, you know, they have been out without a sheriff for a little while. So they don't have that leadership, and it's no disrespect to Lieutenant Schneck, but, you know, they need the upper management position filled as well, so that he can do the lieutenant's job that he knows how to do. There is appear to be a crisis there. The sheriff is an elected position, so therefore it's not like we can just tell him what to do. He has that responsibility and that right to himself. Basically what we can do is we can back that up. And I'm not saying, like I said earlier, I'm not saying that taxes aren't necessary. I'm just saying, where are we going to spend them, and where do we tell people we're going to spend them? If we put it out there and we advertise it as a infrastructure bill, then how come the streets and the roads only got $75,000 out of that budget? Can't fix a pothole with $75,000 and a whole crew. So, again, you know, if they want a tax for law enforcement, then put out a tax for law enforcement. Let people vote on what they think they're spending it on. And I don't know anybody in the community that wouldn't want a better law enforcement.
Thank you. Supervisor Howard?
Yes, appreciate that. Good question. There's no doubt in my mind that public safety, in particular at the Sheriff's Department, is in crisis. The changes that have taken place, unfortunate on timing, but in order to move forward, we need to put a lot of love and care into our sheriff's office, and more importantly, into the deputies and the folks at the jail that help keep us safe on a daily basis. It's a complex issue. It's an issue that stretches not just in Del Norte County, but it stretches the entire state of California. It just varies on the degree at which it occurs. Here in Del Norte County, you've seen some of the most dramatic impacts of what state mandates and early release have done, and the current complications we have around really treating mental illness in our community. I was in Sacramento last week, and this is something that's high on our list. We heard Governor Newsom, instead of talking about fire, instead of talking about drought, he sat to us personally, all 58 counties, and said, I'm going to tackle mental illness. It's no longer appropriate for us to turn our backs, but we got to hit it head on, and all you guys are accountable in doing so. And we're going to pass legislation to get there, and if you don't get on board, you're going to be fined on a daily basis. How this impacts our jail is critical, because our jail is currently housing mentally ill patients. Matter of fact, we're currently housing 12 people to see state psychiatric care. Our jail is under-equipped, underfunded, and not staffed with the appropriate people to deal with these issues, period, end of story. The state does not fund us to do these kind of things, and our jail is not equipped to handle it. And yet, we have a guy in there, I'm not going to say names, I'm not going to violate HIPAA violations, but he was number 397 on a list of about 1,400 people in the state of California waiting to seek psychiatric care and just be put on simple medication. Now, your Del Norte County Board of Supervisors took a step today, and through 1369 Penal Code, we addressed some of this issue for emergency critical care to get some medication to an individual such as this. So
Thank
these
you.
things wouldn't occur. But I'm going to tell you, it's complex, and we need to address it now.
Thank you, Supervisor Howard. Mr. Magarino?
Well, when I first saw the picture, I thought it was a joke, but then after reading the article and finding out that it was true, I was appalled. And the problems that's been going on with the sheriff's department, a lot of it has to do with funding, and a lot of it has to do with the realignment that they did with from the prisons to the jails. That put an unbearable burden on the local county sheriff department. That should never have happened. And that's what not only our sheriff department, but across the state is dealing with the same stuff that we're dealing with. I had a conversation with Garrett Scott, and he seems to be pretty well versed on what's going on. And I've talked to Dean Wilson, and who used to be the sheriff way back when, and he said that Garrett Scott is a upright man. He's going to take care of the job. He's well trained, and we're lucky to see him come back to office. And I'm hoping that with the Measure R funding and a strong leadership, that we will be able to rectify this problem as soon as possible. And it's true, there are folks that should not be in this jail. You know, with the major drug endemic, they shouldn't be there. These folks need to be in a hospital. With the mental illness, they shouldn't be in the jails. They need to be in some other institution that would cater to that. And, I remember in the old days, that's the way it used to be till government started tinkering with things and turned our whole world upside down. But it didn't take long it took a while for us to get to where we are now under those dreadful conditions, and it's going to take a while to get out of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any follow-up questions or clarifying questions?
I do, actually. And this is also for all of you. Is public safety synonymous with law enforcement?
Remember, you have 2 minutes between the three of you.
Go ahead.
We'll go with Mr. Akin first. Oh,
So,
sorry, you
I'll go
choose.
first.
Is public safety synonymous? It can be. But I don't want to dodge your question, but on some of the issues brought up, corrections is the number one provider of health care in this state. Healthcare is number 2 provider. There's something wrong with that. And so, with the governor coming back and saying, you're going to take care of this, you're going to take care of this, and yet there's no funding from above, that's not very, I don't know what word to use right now because I want to be nice about it, but the thing is, public safety and law enforcement can go hand in hand.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's your 2 minutes.
It is,
No, it's 2 minutes for all three of them.
public safety and law enforcement is not synonymous. Matter of fact, public safety can be interpreted in many ways. A lot of people refer to blight as a public safety issue. A lot of people refer to animal control as a public safety issue. And obviously, our public safety funds, which you so keenly identified, 70% of our general fund, which goes to public safety, that's probation, that's the DA's office, that's the jail, that's our sheriff's department. So it's a quite deep list, and that's why the budget and allocation is so large.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think it's synonymous. I think it would be synonymous with a moral society, a society that neighbor watches out for neighbor and care for each other, a society that's not so involved with so many other things, and there's so much stuff that's completely distracting people from one direction to the other. And law enforcement does help because you have that reinforcement of somebody that may go astray.
Thank you. Our next question will come back from Dan Schmidt from the Del Norte Triplicate. Dan?
Thank you. In a related area, how can county government get the message out that there are consequences for criminal behavior? We see this catch and release or we've all talked about realignment, early release. What can we do to deliver the message that crime does not pay?
We'll start first with Mr. Akin.
We can switch around if you want to, but it's up to you.
Give me one.
There was a request.
Repeat that just real quick, would you?
Yes, sir. How do we inform and enforce the notion that criminal behavior has consequences? If you break the law, there's consequences for your misbehavior, instead of simply taking them in and turning them loose so they can commit another crime. What can we do? What can the county do to change what is becoming an ever-increasing problem?
So, oddly enough, the way it is set up is the county has a lot more power than it's actually wielding. The county doesn't have to let the state tell us and dictate how we do things. So we come together as a county, we bring the DA together, we bring law enforcement together, we bring the Board of Supervisors together, and we say, we're not going to put up with this kind of behavior. There's no law that says we have to catch and release. There's no law that says we don't have to penalize these lower level, small crimes that I kind of have an issue with, because theft and all that stuff is not based on a dollar amount. It's still the same behavior. Isn't it the behavior we're trying to correct? So we need to come together and figure out, and I know there are budget constraints and crises, and I know there's some issues with the sheriff's office, but that doesn't stop us from doing the job in place, and those laws are already in place. So it's just a matter of coming together and dealing with it.
Thank you. Supervisor Howard?
Yeah, this is an age-old question, and I'm glad you bring it up. It's very well-timed. California is a very progressive state, and they have a vision for how criminal justice should occur here. And as they're finding out with some what I would call very progressive legislation, we're finally potentially seeing the results of what well-intended legislation is and how it affects us. Proposition 47, Proposition 57, AB 103, or AB 109, these were all intended to react to federal cases for early release. And what were good intentions to help clear out potentially some lower level criminal offenses, allow them to get back into public society, become ethical, well-behaved, and have a moral compass, it hasn't been very effective. Recidivism rates are quite high. And what we're seeing now is a situation where there's no respect for law. And if we're not a society of laws, we're not a society. And what we see here in Del Norte County is a reflection of what we see statewide. No respect for law. And we have theft, although petty in some cases, occurring every day here. We're all affected by it personally, whether it's a vehicle break-in or something else. And those criminals are booked and released, because that's how the law is currently set up for low-level petty crime. Same with drug offenses that oftentimes escalate into larger, more debilitating substances, which create mental health issues and crises in our community, which ultimately we deal with upstream in a way that really taxes our budgets as a county to deal with these types of substance abuses.
Thank
So
you.
it's a huge, complex issue. I wish we had more time to address it. Thank you, Dan.
Well, I think it's a little simpler than that. I think that once the criminals start seeing examples of the high price they're going to pay for their criminal activity, which they're not right now, they're going to take notice, and they're going to realize that's not worth the crime. And once we start, and the laws are in place, okay, short of violating their constitutional rights, the laws are in place to be able to take these criminals, and I'm talking about regular offenders. These are criminals that have a rap sheet, a long rap sheet, and they're just getting in and getting out, like all this smash and grab that's been going on in LA and all these department stores they're breaking in. Some of these guys that got caught have already been catched and released dozens of times. So what is it to them? They're going to go out there and break into a jewelry store and walk away with millions of dollars? It's worth the risk, because all they're going to do is let me go. I'll be on the streets in a week. Once they start getting examples that they're going to be paying a very high price for their crime, that would put an end to this criminal activity that we're seeing overwhelm our communities.
Thank you. Any follow-up questions?
Very briefly, thank you. Do we have the means within our county finances to build another jail, expand the jail, so that we can actually incarcerate people and keep them in jail for the length of their term?
Supervisor Howard, I heard your request. You can answer this one first.
Yeah, and I think it's best that I do. No is the short answer. We've been able to secure through ARP funds about $1.3 million. Additionally, Senator Feinstein was able to come in with a little over $3 million. And we've also approached Senator McGuire for some short-term fixes in the neighborhood of $2 million that I'm hoping he could allocate in this year's funding cycle to address some of the more simple actions that we need to take at our jail currently and at our aging. 1990 was the last time our sheriff's building had anything done to it, but address our aging infrastructure there. It's not equipped right now to deal with what the state has asked us to do.
Mr. Magarino?
Well, we've been having issues since I can remember. That was the sheriff department, was also one of the departments that I investigated during my grand jury term, and it was run really well. I mean, Ms. Wilson was doing a good job, but the thing he was constantly saying is we don't have money, we don't have the funding. So I think that what we need to do is we need to get creative. We need to perhaps get these folks that that need to spend time in prison, and we can't keep them in jails, right? So what we need to do is probably put a ankle collar on them. They need to stay home, okay? They're not going to be out in the street victimizing people. So we need to get creative with that, and if they get out of their house, then we're just going to add more time to them to the point where they become, eligible to go to state prison.
Thank you. Mr. Akin?
I agree with Mr. Howard. The short answer is no. It really is. And it's always going to be no when we have missing monies out of other funds and we have unfunded retirement plans and we have all that other stuff going on. It's always going to be no with that. We also have to find ways to cut back on some of the waste and stuff going on. You can walk down the streets and actually see money being wasted in this community, and it's a shame. And I had a lengthy conversation with a gentleman that's in charge of a certain area, and he agreed with me. He said, I didn't think about that stuff, and there is a lot of places to save that money.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So the next panelist is Monique Camarena from Redwood Voice.
Right. Youth mental health and the lack of mental health services for youth in Del Norte County have been topics of concern for a long time. If elected, what will be on your agenda for improving access to quality mental health services for youth and creating an environment that supports mental health in our community?
We'll start with Mr. Magarino.
I think a lot of the issues that we're dealing as far as with mental health really goes to the root of drug abuse. Some of the synthetic drug that's out there right now literally changes your brain's chemistry. And therefore, once it does that, then you become a mental health patient or an issue. It's not a problem that we're going to be able to handle right away. It's going to have to be, direct, forceful, but with compassion. And the way we do that is, like I was trying to explain earlier, we have several prongs of how to deal with this. One is like with the homelessness, you figure out who can be helped, who can come out, you find a place for them, they go back to being productive society. Then the other one is somebody that, just got into drugs. They need to get out of that that state that they got themselves into. And then there's the other person that just enjoys that lifestyle, where then with them, there's not much you can do. And then you have the mental health issue, which followed all those situations of drug abuse and just poor, I don't know, just.
Thank you. Supervisor Howard?
Thank you. This is something that absolutely needs to be addressed at some of the highest levels, including at our school board where a lot of this starts. However, we need to move as far upstream as we can. Every child in this community deserves hope. They deserve to have a dream. And that dream is sometimes not provided in the environment they grow up in, which creates these mental health issues that you refer to. Del Norte County, it's amplified. It's in our community vision on a daily basis because our community is so small. Our population gets a chance to see what happens when a child commits suicide, what happens when a child falls under and gets left behind. We have a lot of good nonprofit programs that try to surround those children with services, but oftentimes those childs, they slip through the system. They really do. And there needs to be more effort and more energy put behind giving that child just that ray of hope. And sometimes it's difficult because the environment of couch surfing, the environment that they face every day, where maybe school is their only outlet to get away from what they're living with, where their next meal's coming from, the stress that provides to a child is like no other that we've ever experienced in our lifetime. And until we could change that and move upstream and give that child hope through wraparound type services, knowing where those folks are at, that's critical. But I'm going to tell you one thing. You want to talk about mental health issues. What do you think about 250 homeless children in our community mean? Because that's the real number here that we're talking about. There's 215 kids in our community that are hopeless. They're homeless. Hopeless and homeless don't equate to strong mental health for our children. And until we address the root causes of this and find homes for these kids, we're not going to change the outcomes that you're looking for.
Thank you. Mr. Akin?
Thank you. So I liked your question from earlier. So is mental health, drug abuse, all synonymous? We can't keep painting the same picture with the same brush and one broad brush. They all break down. Suicides aren't all mental health. Suicides are mental health, I'm sorry. The drug addiction, that's an injury to somebody's psyche. That's not derived from mental health or a problem they had that caused that. So that's more of an injury in most cases. And again, you can't paint everything with one brush. Can you clarify your question again one more time?
Oh, repeat it, or?
Just in a short.
Oh, what would be on your agenda for improving access to quality mental health and creating an environment that supports mental health?
Okay, and that's also another monetary issue. We have a hard time keeping medical professionals in this community as it is. There is an upcoming thing where they're talking about bringing in some mental health people and some drug counseling and all that with a lot of money behind it and guaranteed for 3 years. What happens after that 3 years? And if we can't keep our own mental health people we need now and our doctors we need now, how are we going to keep them? So, like Mr. Howard said, it's convoluted and there's a lot going on for a 2-minute answer.
Follow-up or clarifying questions?
You guys said there's a lot of different causes to support mental health here, but for all of you, what would be the first step to improving the mental health crisis in the county?
Start with Mr. Magarino.
The first step I would take is we would definitely need to figure out how to directly deal with this. There's some mental health issues that folks have that you can take prescription for and whatnot. If you can get somebody to stay on their medication, that would alleviate that. So the first step probably would be to help folks understand the importance of their medication and to take it.
Thank you. Mr. Akin?
Well, I think the first step is going to be monetary. We can't get around that. And the mental health professionals we bring up here have to be mentally health trained, not just LCSWs or whatever else we have out there. They have to be experts in that field. Then again, it's the retention. We have to keep them here. So it all comes back to a big thing about money, but you know, the government closed down all mental health facilities in the past. It needs to be dealt with as a mental health issue and not a B of something else, part B of something else.
Thank you. Mr. Howard, or Supervisor Howard, sorry.
No worries. We need to address this with a wraparound from every partner that we could utilize in this community. And I'm talking about partnerships with the nonprofits, tribal governments, and county governments, and city governments that allow us to access those children, identify those children, and effectively treat those children and get them out of the environment they're in. And when we have the resources to do that, which there's a lot of money flowing down from the state that we can identify to do so, we pursue it, we put it in place, and we make it effective in changing the course of that child's life.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Jessica St. Andrews from Wild Rivers Outpost. Jessica?
You mentioned other departments besides the Del Norte County Sheriff's Office that were able to hire staff with Measure R funding. The Office of Emergency Services is one. The Del Norte County Animal Control Division is another. What other programs need attention through Measure R or in general? And as the Del Norte County Board of Supervisors, what can you do to make that happen?
We'll start with Supervisor Howard.
Wonderful. Let's just focus a little bit about a really big deal for a tourist community, which we clearly are right now, and there's reasons for that, but we could dive into it later, is blight. It's talked about a lot. But Mr. Mello, who's our current code enforcement officer, is completely overwhelmed. Matter of fact, he sees well over 400 cases a year. He doesn't have it. Even if he tries to address one case a year, he's not going to be able to get around them all. So Measure R specifically went after dollars to put towards code enforcement and hire somebody to assist Mr. Mello in not only identifying those issues around blight, but in addition, move it forward through the system of courts that we have in place here currently in the county to get those areas treated, get those people responsible for creating it addressed, and clean it up. And if they can't clean it up, put those properties in a condition that the county takes it back through liens. All those structures are currently in place, but if we can't get these things on the docket because we don't have the employees to address it, then it can't be done. But with your Measure R tax dollars, that's exactly what has occurred. The Board of Supervisors has put that in place, and it's currently happening today, and we really appreciate folks supporting those efforts.
Thank you. Mr. Akin?
I thought you were going the other way. I agree with part of the things that Mr. Howard said, but I find it odd that we just had a driveway up in Smith River on the dollar store. And the first thing that came out of their mouth was nothing to be done about it. Now, how are we going to put blight people in our courts that's an already overcrowded court system? If they're not looking at these cases, why would they look at those? So again, yes, and that's right, it does come down to taxes and money. So there are a lot of places in this county. This county is one of the biggest wonders of this county is that a lot of it floats on the back of volunteers. And we have a tremendous amount of volunteers in this community that work themselves to the bone, some better than some professional outfits I've seen. And that's what we've done for years. And I think that we can all agree that we're kind of at the point where the volunteers aren't enough, and we have to kind of, the old saying, go big or go home. We're at that point. And how do we go bigger without having the ability to fund it and the revenue to fund it? It's a very systemic and very wide issue that we're trying to come up with a short answer for.
Thank you. Mr. Magarino?
Well, I think that, first of all, I think that Measure R is going to probably bring in a lot more money than it was anticipated. And reason being is because property values have gone up quite a bit in this county, and I don't think that got taken into account. So Measure R is going to bring in more money than it's anticipated, and we're going to be able to have more flexibility and be able to deal with getting officers. Hopefully, my goal is to get resident deputies out in these two areas, which will bring more presence, which will have, people think twice about it. The code enforcement, I think that's a big deal. I think we could have these folks that are blight properties, that are ignoring it and refusing to, clean it up, that we'll have the ability to be able to confiscate the property and sell it for the tax burden, and also have somebody that is interested in building on that property. We should make it easier for the community to be able to take advantage of the ADU by streamlining, but not only streamlining, but also provide free structure plan that you can give free to the individuals that want to build on that property. So they don't have to deal with engineers, they don't have to deal with, getting permits, getting all that stuff. The county should be able to provide, the department should be able to provide free design, free planning that these builders can use without having to go through all the hoops and expenses of coming up with one.
Thank you. Any follow-up questions?
Not at this time.
So the next question comes from Mike Thornton from KFUG Community News.
Thank you. Some of this has already been addressed, but let me ask the question and we can go for it. Homelessness and the lack of affordable housing have been chronic issues in Del Norte County. A recent statements made at a recent County Board of Supervisors meeting placed the number between 500 and 800. Generally recognized by most people in the community as being chronic people who are homeless, not transients. These are far above the official numbers that are usually cited. Several community groups and individuals have worked over the years to address these issues in the community. What will you do to bring actual projects for transitional and low-income housing solutions to fruition during your term as a Del Norte County Board of Supervisor? And that question is for all three of you.
And we'll start with Mr. Magarino.
Well, I think I've answered that question and several times just recently with the ADU and the county being able to facilitate builders and the law enforcement being able to get these blight properties out and make them properties that people can live in, and even do some kind of grants that would encourage contractors and investors and I don't know, maybe a tax break or some kind of temporary encouragement, some kind of temporary lure that would bring them in. And once we get that ball rolling, it's just people are just going to flood in. We just need to get that spark going. And I think by providing free planning plans for construction and be able to grab some of this blight property that everybody's ignoring, and either they pay their taxes on it, they get it cleaned up, or there's going to be consequences, and be able to use some of this property to build affordable, even a small community of tiny homes. Nowadays, people like that. It's kind of a thing now. And it's better than being on the street or sleeping in your car. And that's something that can happen very quickly. I'm talking about within a year or two. We just need to be able to, make the decision on it. Really, that's all it takes, is just making a decision. No studies, no going back to, let's have a consultant, or let's go back and have a community organization. It's there. The plan's already there. All we need to do is execute it.
Thank you. Mr. Akin.
So, So, thank you. The homeless issue is something that I'm pretty passionate about. You go all the way back to the Miller case versus Idaho, widely misinterpreted. The appeals courts came out and overturned a lot of it. When we talk about ADUs and tax breaks in an already tax-stressed community, where does free and tax breaks come from? More free? And again, I want to look, and it's another broad brush thing when we say homeless. When we look on our streets right now, we see a crisis, right? If you look back 5-6 years ago, don't quote me on the time frame, but we went back and we cleaned up behind Safeway and we mowed all those trees and plants down and we took $2,500 worth of stuff to the dump every day that we paid for as taxpayers. Where did we think those people were going to go? We flushed them back out into the community and now it's visible. Is the crisis different than what it was then? I believe it has increased some, but I believe that, we can't push it out into the people's faces and then say now it's a crisis. It always was. So ADUs, the other thing about ADUs is that those are mother-in-law's quarters in your backyard. Is that where we're going to put these folks? And how many people are actually going to stand up and say, oh, I'll take them? Is that the answer? And then you talk about low-income housing and buying these hotels. Then everybody loses the occupancy tax. So there's another gloss to our overtax system. Those to me aren't answers. And I'm not saying I have the answers. It's very complicated. It's very hard. And it's definitely something we're going to have to look into. But again, the other thing is don't paint it with one brush. You've got your mental health, you've got your drug addicts, and you've got, and I personally believe a large majority of these folks is a choice.
Thank you. Supervisor Howard?
Thank you. I have done this. 37 rooms, Coastal Inn Suites, it's now called the Legacy. Your Board of Supervisors did that to start addressing the issue. It's a fact that with that move, per capita, we house more homeless than the rest of the state of California in Del Norte County with that single move to address it. Now, I had a lot of folks talk to me before that vote was taken. A lot of people, like the city, said, not in my backyard. This is not going to work. You're going to put people that don't deserve to be in there. The bottom line, we're taking children out of cars and putting families with vital needs into a situation where they could have wraparound services. And for the most part, those same people have come up to me and said, you know what, I was wrong. This is working. We don't have a lot of opportunity here in Del Norte County to site some of these locations. But where we do have some locations, we've actively pursued this with our partners, and we've identified some spots. And I think the county, at least the current Board of Supervisors, is absolutely willing to move forward with some of the things that have been mentioned here this evening. Accessory dwelling units has been talked about. It's not the answer, and it's definitely not a roadblock from the county. Accessory dwelling units, that was a state issue. It took away local control. Matter of fact, the county community development part has no control whether or not you can put an ADU on your property. It's a non-issue for the county. I wish it was an issue for us, because some of these areas where ADUs are being cited aren't appropriate. Absolutely not appropriate. But when it comes to housing homeless, which is the original piece of this question, there's a lot more opportunity out there. And we need to move quickly to identify locations and take advantage of state funding that is flowing rapidly out of Sacramento to our area to address the issue.
Thank you. Any follow-up or clarifying questions?
I do have a follow-up. Thank you. You spoke about taking children out of cars. There are a number of people who are living in various types of vehicles in this community. One community, for example, Arcata, has created a safe parking program where people who are living in vehicles can take those vehicles and park safely, be able to access sanitation, also other types of programs, things that might be able to help them move out of having to live in those vehicles. Do you support such a program in Del Norte County, and will you work to help create one here during your term as county supervisor?
I'm going to say yes without knowing the full details. This sounds like a great program to get those kids out of living in Pacific Shores on the state wildlife area, off the streets, and to services that we, through DHSS and various other programs, could provide.
Is that to all of them?
I'm sorry.
Okay, just
I'm
making
sorry
sure.
I didn't make that clear.
Mr. Magarino.
Well, yeah, it sounds like a great idea. I would certainly like to go down there and look at it a little more thoroughly. And some stuff that may work for them probably doesn't work for us. If that's the case, and we're going to have to figure out how to have some kind of patrol security there that can, so these people won't get victimized. You know, when you get a big group without any security, somebody's going to get victimized, okay? And I'm sure we can find a location to find that opportunity to put a place like that. And I mean, right off the top of my head, geez, there's quite a few big open spaces around. So.
Thank you. Mr. Akin.
Yeah, so I think without a doubt that things need to be done. Again, I'm going to come back to what cost. What cost are we going to do them? And the other thing is, we have to be careful what we're saying yes to. Now, I'm not going to simplify it or take back from what Mr. Howard said, but one of the things he said was we took kids out of cars. And with the hotel over there, we have people with cars and slight income. So is it low-income housing or is it housing the homeless? The homeless are still out there. So which people are we talking about? Some of the future things coming, they're talking about, so we don't call them homeless anymore, we call them unhoused. The biggest population of unhoused people in this country right now is those that came across the border. So that's great, they need help too. Is that who we're gonna house with this $84 billion? And then we're still gonna look out our windows and see what we consider homeless out there on the streets and breaking in the back doors?
Thank you. Thank you.
Up next are questions that have been submitted to us through email by the public. The format will be same as the previous section. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to address the question like they would like. The first question comes from Mike from Smith River. What is your position on the exclusion operating agreement recently proposed by Del Norte Ambulance? This anti-competitive monopoly proposal would effectively permanently entrench Del Norte Ambulance as the one and only 911 provider for the county. Del Norte Ambulance has among the highest transport rates in the entire state, and this proposal would essentially permanently exclude any competition at any time in the future. These rate hikes are routinely rubber stamp approved by the Board of Supervisors each year. This anti-competitive monopoly exclusive operating agreement is now before the board and would have to be approved by them. If you, candidate, are in favor of this anti-competitive monopoly proposal, please explain why. If you oppose the anti-competitive monopoly agreement and the continued soaring rates, please explain why. Would you consider another model for delivering ambulance services considered a basic healthcare service? Many models exist that would transfer this essential service from the profit-hungry, non-transparent private sector to a service-oriented, fully transparent public sector service. Would you consider a study of such an exchange? If not, why not?
There you go.
Yeah, sorry about that. That was a long paragraph I had to read through.
And we will start with Mr. Akin.
Well, I lost the question, but, you know, and actually I saw this subject come up and I know some friends that worked on this subject and I wished I had more time to talk with them and understand it. I don't think that any kind of monopoly is a good idea. I know we have our fire departments that are responding to 1,600 calls, they said. 6% of those are fire calls. 6% of the fire department, hear what I'm saying, is fire-related calls. So the rest of them is basically, I don't know, I'm not going to lump them all into one, but a lot of their calls are backing up the ambulance company. So maybe our ambulance company, and if they're getting their funding somewhere else, need to supply more ambulances or need to supply more services. I don't know the particulars of it, so I don't want to get too far out there and say something I don't know the reality of. But it's never a good idea to me to turn something into a sole operation and exclude everybody else, because competition is what makes the world go around. So without any further information on that, I basically don't know what I'm talking about.
Thank you. Thank you. Supervisor Howard?
Yeah, I'm not sure where this Smith River constituent is getting their information, but I'm not entirely sure the statements that were made through the question are actually factual. I do know that the Delaware County Board of Supervisors is currently looking at this issue, and not an issue of giving or granting a monopoly to Delaware Ambulance, but rather doing an audit, which Supervisor Short proposed and is currently going into effect. You only have to go back, I think, about 4 or 5 meetings when this robust discussion occurred at the Delaware County Board of Supervisors. So I'm not entirely sure how to answer the question because I'm not entirely sure it's factual.
Thank you. Mr. Magarino?
Well, I find it hard to believe that a county would commit themselves to a lifetime contract with any vendor. It's, first of all, it's illegal. And whenever a county does some kind of MOU or some kind of contract with any vendor, it usually has to go, or it would have a period of where it would have to be rebid, put out for bid. And I know that because I've dealt with a lot of counties and I've done a lot of business with counties as a business owner. And even though my contracts, every 4 years or whatever period they decide has to be reviewed, not only by the directors, but also by open public quorum, explanation of why. But I find that hard to believe that there's a monopoly going on there. It would be, they would have to prove it, and it would be obvious that it's a monopoly, and it's illegal.
Thank you. Our last question for the evening comes from Amber of Crescent City. And she says, a well-built environment leads to healthier living, eating, and physical activity. Well-designed, healthy communities shape our decisions and our health. The decisions you make today will impact future generations and can curb the problems before they happen, costing our taxpayers far less than paying for the services after the problems occur. What are your thoughts about addressing our community health challenges, such as our higher than normal smoking rates, obesity, and physical inactivity rates? Per University of Merced study, these community behaviors cost Del Norte $82 million a year in chronic disease expenses and productivity loss. How are you planning to address this problem? And we will start with Mr. Magarino.
Well, that's a lot of money, $82 million. That could be spent elsewhere and for better purposes. We're a county that a lot of people tend to come up here to retire. There's some folks. Also, we're a beautiful county where a lot of folks come out here to visit and spend time out in the woods and the beauty, the scenery that we have out here. As far as dealing with the problems we have, as far as the high smoking, that's something that we're going to have to, I would say, educate the public more and get the point across that it's harmful and it's expensive, and you're taking very important resources away from other things that we can do because of self-inflicting wounds. So I would say probably we would just have to really enforce the law to keep the drugs and alcohol and tobacco away from kids, and at the same time, educate the public a little better than we have been.
Thank you. Supervisor Howard?
Yeah, this is a rather unique question because when it comes down to it, it's really changing behavior around personal choice. And this is something that I'm fairly passionate about, something I'm involved with on a daily basis in a business that I work with. And how do you change behavior in a community without impacting personal liberties? And this is interesting question because we've seen what it can do in a place like New York where they restricted the sale of certain size beverages at a Circle K per se. You can't have your big gulp any longer, or you can't have access to your big bag of cookies. And it really comes down to educating and, more importantly, providing access to nutritional foods and making it easier and cheaper for folks to have access to those nutritional foods that create issues of obesity and oftentimes relate or create issues of dependence upon sugars, which is really what it amounts to. How do you deal with this without infringing on personal rights is a very tricky issue. And it's an issue that I would personally address and have tried to address through activities when I got involved with the Blue Zone ventures so many years ago, almost 9 years ago today, where you look at communities around the world that are extremely healthy and provide for their community healthy choices. And if you could put those healthy choices, let's just say on the end of the Safeway aisle, by working with retailers to say, I'm going to put bananas and apples on the end of that shelf today and not Pepsi Cola and not Frito-Lay, but I'm going to put that healthy choice on the end of the aisle. Maybe that is what they see as they're checking out in the line versus that high sugar, high fructose snack.
Thanks.
So it's about education.
Thank you. Mr. Akin?
Well, I agree it's about education, and going back to what I originally said about making this a destination community and not a pass-through. It's very much about civil liberties and such too. I think the government needs to back off on a lot of trying to be involved in what everybody's doing. We're not miracle workers. We're not going to fix all these kind of problems. And maybe that's beyond what the Board of Supervisors is doing or can do. You know, it's great to say we'd like to see it change too, because we would. We don't control marketing. We don't control Safeway. We don't control advertising. The entire American diet is just in shambles. You want to talk about a crisis? The entire American diet is just, it's killing all of us. And quite frankly, there's times I go to the store and I can't find anything I want to choose to eat because it's just not there. So that's a very loaded question. But when our schools are looking like, you know, they're on the verge of looking like blight and everything else, people don't want to come here for that. So there's a lot to be fixed before we can really showcase the rest of it. So there is no easy answer to that.
Thank you very much.
So that's all the public comments we have time for tonight. To wrap up tonight's candidate forum, each candidate has 2 minutes to make their closing statements. We'll begin with Frank Magarino.
Thank you. Well, earlier when I introduced myself, I pretty much put out what my experiences are and how I feel about this beautiful community that we live in and what I want to do for it and what I can bring to the table. I have a lot of experience in the private sector. I've got a lot of experience in the government sector too. And I can bring that, I can bring a lot of my knowledge and expertise to fresh eyes to the board. Because I believe that term limits is something that this community voted for and expected to see. And in general, all the other board members have honored that. And I've had a lot of people saying that they were not happy that term limits is not being, the voters are not getting what they asked for. And that actually encouraged me to run because I felt I could do a good job for this community. I think I've proven that through my, as a Del Norte Unified School District trustee. We've made very difficult decisions, and I'm in a position that I've got common sense, and I know how to deal with problems, and I know how to bring people together. I've done it before, and I would like to have that opportunity in the supervisor's position, and I want your vote, and I hope I get it. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Howard.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, panelists, for those excellent questions tonight. It dove into some deep issues that need a lot more time than we have time to address here. It's interesting that this term limit thing has come up for discussion, but it did go to the voters. The voters did vote, and they voted for 3 terms. Just so you're aware, not a 2-term, 3. That's 12 years. So the voters did vote for term limits, that's correct, but for 3 terms. So I'm not currently violating any term limit procedure.
Then I take that back.
And in addition, I'll just correct you. I wanted to do it earlier, but it's a 1-cent sales tax. This isn't a tax on property for Measure R. So it's a 1-cent sales tax that is allocated in a separate pot for our general fund. And I also want to clarify Japan. It seems to be an issue. My family, including your family, Frank, invested a lot in ensuring that the Japanese were welcome here, and it was the biggest move this community ever made in putting Del Norte County on the map for the future of this economy. My family personally spent over $25,000 to ensure this relationship occurred that gave a bright hope for the future of our students. And we realized some incredible benefits from it. Benefits specific to the NBC piece that went in front of 30 million viewers. Our economy is strong. It's never been stronger. The reason why our projections were low is because the tax revenue that did come in, every additional cent that brought us from our estimated 1.3 under Measure R to closer to 1.8 is because revenue is coming from outside this community to be spent here. That's a fact. Now, we didn't have time to talk about a lot of stuff that I've done since my terms in office. I'm going to talk about a few of those briefly as I can. Cell towers down Highway 199 not only brought in for the region of Gasky, or cell tower and cell services improved, but public safety issues on a very dangerous corridor, Highway 199. Transfer station I've been working on in Smith River, getting that done. A brand new boat ramp and access on Saxon's boat ramp off of Fred Hay Drive. Dollar General turn pockets, to name a few. The list goes on. Appreciate your support for a 3rd term as allowed by the voters of Del Norte County.
Thank you. And Mr. Akin.
I think my last answer had a lot of closing statements in it. So to say that, you know, this is a job interview, and I'm not up here to say that there's anything wrong with Mr. Howard or the things that have gone on in the county. That's not up to me to say. There's a lot of work to be done in this county, and I do think there are a lot of really hard, tough decisions to be made, and we need to change some of the direction of where past board decisions have gone, and it's going to require some real heavy pushback. So it's a job interview, and I guess it's up to the people of the county to decide if we keep doing what we've been doing or if we look at other ideas. Thank you. Appreciate the audience and appreciate you all's questions and the facility here. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank Frank Magarino, Chris Howard, and Joe Akin for taking part in tonight's forums, and I'd also like to thank the United Methodist Church for providing the venue.
Yes, thank you so much to each of the candidates for coming out tonight and sharing your values with the community you may soon be representing. And thank you to everyone who put this forum together. We have 2 more district forums. Next Tuesday on the 3rd at 6 p.m., we're going to be hearing from candidates from District 4. And the following Tuesday on the 10th at 6 p.m., we're going to be hearing from District 5. So please tune in to KFUG so that you can make an informed decision come election time. Have a great night, everyone.